The chair lays out House Bill 723 and recognizes Representative Patterson to explain the bill.
Thank you, Chairwoman Click, and members of the committee for the opportunity to lay out this bill. I'm not expected you to answer this first question, by the way, but how many of you knew that an alleged serial killer recently operated for years in Dallas and Collin counties, targeting elderly residents? I bet not many of you. It's been overshadowed by COVID-19 this past year, as you could imagine. But due to recent media attention, you may be aware that at least 24 senior citizens in both Dallas and Collin counties who were allegedly murdered by a gentleman named Billy Shamirmir, with 18 indictments so far. Some of the deaths date back to 2016 or possibly earlier and are still under investigation. The investigation continues because the deaths were initially ruled to be natural causes, and the death certificates reflected as much. However, when investigations were requested due to suspicious family members, it was discovered that dozens of senior citizens had not died from natural causes, but were rather victims of homicide. I first learned of this case from my neighbor, who is here to testify on this bill today. I'll never forget standing in my dining room and listening to the story of her mom, who had passed away nearly 2 years prior to this conversation. Her mother, Marilyn Bixler, appeared to have died of natural causes, or so she believed, for 18 months. Just imagine for a moment that you've lost your mom. The heartache, the pain, the grief, it would affect everything about you. Imagine just trying to get your life back on track when some 18 months later, you relive all of it again, but this time with the horror of homicide. What's worse is that you had to find out that your mom was potentially a victim of a local serial killer on Facebook. You see, like many others, Miss Bixler's death was ruled due to natural causes, but later her death certificate was amended when it was discovered that something altogether unnatural had happened. But did the police or medical examiner notify next of kin that the change had been made? Well, that's why we're here today. Incredibly and sadly, none of the family was notified that she, in fact, did not die of natural causes. Why? Well, they didn't have to, or at least they didn't have the courtesy to think that family members would want to know that their mom, their grandmother, their loved one was part of a massive murder investigation. That's why I authored House Bill 723, as it would require that next of kin be notified when cause of death on a death certificate is amended. I'd like to share that I'm currently working on a committee substitute to clarify that next of kin is only required to be contacting for non-pending death certificates. Folks, that's like 3,000 a year. That's less than 12 per county in the state. Members, this is a simple bill, and unlike the experience of my neighbor, it would allow for families to be appropriately informed by a professional. That's the least that we could do, is offer that courtesy to these families. Personally, I cannot imagine learning that my loved one had died from a different cause than originally communicated, and I certainly can't imagine hearing that on Facebook secondhand. No one should. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today to lay out House Bill 723. I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have, and I'd appreciate the opportunity to close.
Members, any questions for Representative Patterson? Representative Patterson, so the notification, is that through mail, telephone? I mean, how are you addressing that?
We don't have a specific notification type in this plan. Given that it's typically a low number of death certificates in the state, we would hope that a phone call could be made, but we would leave that up to them to notify folks in the manner that they see fit. In fact, in Collin County, where my neighbor's case took place, their medical examiners already said this is a no-brainer and he's going to do it anyways. Now, that's one of 254 counties, but he's already agreed to do it once the bill was filed and kind of caught traction in the media. It's been a big story in DFW.
All righty, thank you. We will call our first witness.
Thank you, ma'am.
The chair calls Cheryl Pangburn. Please state your name, your position on the bill, and who you represent.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chairman Click, and thank you, members of the Public Health Committee, for allowing me to speak today. My name is Cheryl Pangburn. I'm representing myself today, and I'm here in support of House Bill 723. I'm here today because I'm the one that Jared was referring to, who learned about my mother's death on Facebook. It was March 27th of 2019, and a former high school classmate of mine was going through a victims list and happened to run across my name and recognized it from us knowing each other in the past, and she just reached out to me, simple act of support. We're going through the same thing. We might be able to help each other. Please feel free to reach out to me. The problem was I had no idea what she was talking about. Anytime you see the name victim associated with anything, it kind of gets your heart racing. But then I Google searched the name Billy Chamirmir and was horrified. So from that point on, I kind of made it my mission to figure out what the nature of this was and how my mother was involved, and sadly learned that this was in fact true. I came to learn that there had been a large-scale investigation upon this man's arrest, and during that time, as victims were identified, the Collin County Medical Examiner would change the cause of death from natural causes. In my case, it was changed to, my mother's case, it was changed to undetermined pending the crime scene investigation. Some of them were changed to homicide, some of them as specific as the way in which the homicide occurred. I wanted to know why no one had informed me of this. And I was told that it was simply a miscommunication. The police investigator thought that was the job of the medical examiner. He thought it was the job of the police investigator. Consequently, no one informed me of it, and that's how I came to learn about it on Facebook. I learned that there is no requirement currently for the medical examiner to notify next of kin when a cause of death is amended. So it was 11 months after this amendment occurred that I was made aware of it, and it was not that anyone reached out to me. It was simply that it came up in a conversation with the police investigator. As Jared alluded to, there was some good news that after he filed this bill, the media stepped forward and covered it and reached out to the Collin County Medical Examiner, who by this time had heard of the bill. And in his statement, he said that this legislation is the right thing to do and it's easy to implement. And he said, as a matter of fact, so much so that in my medical examiner's office, I'm going to go ahead and implement that now, not even wait for the bill to pass. I'm just going to go ahead and do it because I believe it to be the right thing to do. So he is already doing that in his medical office now. So my appeal to you today is to approve this bill. I believe it to be just a common sense act of compassion. It's a simple courtesy to grieving families. It's the request to just have the medical examiner notify the next of kin when there's an amendment to a death certificate. And that's my appeal to you today. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my story. Thank you all.
Members, any questions? Thank you for being here and sharing your story. The chair calls Shannon Dion. Please state your name, who you represent, and your position on the bill.
My name is Shannon Gleason Dion. I'm here representing Secure Our Seniors Safety, and I am in support of this bill. Thank you, Chairman Click, and the members of the Public Health Committee for allowing me to speak this morning. SOSS, Secure Our Senior Safety, was started by the families murdered in senior residential facilities. I am here because Billy Chamirmir is jailed in Dallas, indicted on 18 murders, suspected of more. 18 families learned from police their mothers died at the hands of a serial killer. If convicted, the third most prolific serial killer in Texas history. In many cases, as in mine, the notification came months after we said goodbye to Mama, Nana, or Meemaw. I clearly remember the moment the phone rang. Detective John Hoffman called in the afternoon, mid-July 2018. He walked me through the story, who he was, what he was investigating, leading me gently as possible to the conclusion that my mother's death was part of the serial killer's investigation. He scheduled an appointment to ask more questions and to answer mine. It was horrifying. It was devastating. Under the circumstances, the call and appointment were the best that could be done. Now I knew my suspicions were right about what had happened to my mother. She didn't die naturally, as I had been told. Cheryl Bixler Pangburn's story is more horrifying. It is inexcusable and reprehensible. Her added suffering was unnecessary if authorities had contacted her instead of her finding out on Facebook Messenger her mother was murdered. Imagine looking through your feed and it says, "Cheryl, I saw your mom's name on the list. Call me if you want. My mother was also a victim of Billy Shamirmir." The failure of being correctly notified with the reason and the care and understanding that I got from authorities just added to Cheryl's trauma. SOS's primary focus is simple. This cannot happen to another Texas family. Nobody, no family should ever find out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or any other social media their loved one was murdered. Thankfully, the medical examiner who thought police would be notifying the family has adopted the policy that is in Bill 723. But there are 253 more counties in Texas without this policy. It should not be a policy that may be changed by the following medical examiner, delegating bad news as relayed by another department, hopefully letting someone else do the hard work. HB 723 is simple, short, budget neutral to Texas taxpayers, and should mandate authorities to do the right thing. As the Dallas Morning News editorial board headlined December 9th, 2020, the legislative response to these killings could inject humanity into the system. HB 723 does just that, humanity. Thank you so much for listening to us today.
Thank you for being here today. Members, any questions for the witness? Thank you. Members, we do have Tara Doss with the State Register for the dishes here. If members have got any questions, we can call her up. Any questions? Okay. All righty. The chair, is there anyone else wishing to testify on, for, or against House Bill 723? Chair recognizes Representative Patterson to close.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Just to clarify something earlier, it is written notice, but the department is in charge of how they determine how that written notice is sent to the family. So just to clarify that question that you asked earlier, Madam Chairman. I think you've heard some powerful testimony here today. I'm very proud that this bill enjoys broad bipartisan support. In fact, one of my joint authors, John Turner, Representative John Turner, is here today to lay out another bill, and I appreciate the folks that are helping me here. I'd be happy to take any questions that you have about this at any time, and I just appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today.
Thank you for laying out this bill today. Any questions, members? All righty.
Thank you.
If there's no objection, House Bill 723 will be left pending. The chair hears no objection. House Bill 723 is left pending without objection.